coop, if you aren't good at building coops, well, then hire somebody to build the coop, or, talk somebody into building the coop. I mean, that can be built like in a matter of 2 weekends, right? It just doesn't take that long. Buy the hens. I recommend everybody start out buying chicken feed. It's available and it's still fairly inexpensive right now. And you have so many other things to learn. Yes, there are ways that you can ultimately create the food for your chickens, but you've got so much to learn. Don't have that be one of the things. Plan that. That'll be stage 2, right? That's not stage 1. And like, bam, I mean, really, in 3 weeks after the hens have settled in, because you've moved them and they've got some adjustment. But really, in 3 weeks, you can be having breakfast every day of your life now figured out.
Digest on that for just a minute. They wanted the food to stop, and the food is stopping. The farmers are stopping the food now. So where does it go from here? And you brought up a valid point there, Marjory. Are the farmers in Europe going to plant, and at what percentage would they plant compared to their normal year? That's a very valid question to start crunching some numbers on. And good afternoon, everyone. It's time for us to really take sovereignty back for all of our food production. And as you saw in Oregon, they are now trying to limit and stop all small farms. If you have gravel or a concrete pad and an animal, because they consider that a contained food lot now. And then you could continue to have your cow, your sheep, your goats, your chickens, your rabbits, whatever it is. If it's on a concrete or a stone area, that is considered a contained feedlot now. And they require $100,000 of infrastructure to comply with different regulations and runoff, for a better term. So it's almost like we're going to have to become guerrilla backyard meat producers. And the safest thing, and when I was growing up, when you went to a party, the rule was never talk about religion, never talk about politics. And here we are now at the time where the safest possible thing you could talk about, the weather and the climate, is now the most dangerous thing to talk about at a party. And we're at a point now where they are actually going to try to shut you down from raising chickens, rabbits, having your own home gardens in the back. And we'll talk about this. But Marjory Wildcraft's with us to give us some solutions on raising backyard meat sources, backyard meat production. It's at our fingertips, and we need these solutions. We need to share them wide, and put them into practice. So Marjory, I'm super glad you're here, sharing the knowledge as always, and the floor is yours.
Glad to be here, Dave. Yeah. So I don't know if there's an update on that. They've shut down 50 farms in Maine now. And it's the same thing, which I really appreciate the work you've been doing, alerting, like, hey, in Europe, they just come with new insane regulation that makes it impossible for farmers to farm. And if they don't comply, they become criminals. And that's why the EU is having all that eruption of protests all across the European Union. And are any of those farmers going to plant this spring? Probably not, And then I thought, well, it's Europe, right? But nope. Then it popped out in Oregon. They're doing that. Now Maine, 50 farms in Maine. And what it is these farmers were given basically biosludge. They said, hey, will you put this as fertilizer for your land, which we all know is contaminated with all kinds of stuff. And now they're going back to those farmers and saying, hey, your farms are contaminated. We have to shut them down because you can't grow food there. And it was because of the stuff they gave. I mean, it was a total trap. So yeah, it's intentional. There is an intentional shutting down of the food supply. Now people go, oh, Marjory, and they think, oh, gardens. And I'm like, actually, meat products are more efficient, produce more calories per moment of time and per square foot than anything else. And I have gotten so much flack from the vegans and vegetarians, and God bless Joel Salatin, man, he knows how to argue with them so well. He's got the words. That guy can debate. But yeah, backyard meat production. And people think also of chickens, and they say, hey, we're going to be raising my own chicken. You're not going to raise your own chickens for meat. And here's the one distinction why is chickens are omnivores just like us. And they like to eat things we like to eat, like grains and vegetables and all that sort of stuff, right? Although they do like insects and other things we don't like to eat. But rabbits are pure herbivores. And so they tend to they can turn into protein and fat things that we would not normally eat, like grass or forage or bark or, your landscape trimmings. So I've really been recommending to people, one buck and three breeding does here in the tropics, easily 100 rabbits a year out of that setup. And when I was in Texas, I was regularly getting between 75 and 85 a year. And that's because it gets so hot there. They can't breed. Nobody wants to be pregnant in Texas in the summertime. It's horrible. That's a lot of meat. So a rabbit is just like a chicken. It's very equivalent to a chicken in terms of size and weight and taste even. And all of your chicken recipes, you can absolutely just replace rabbit with it. And, you can seamlessly go on with your life. In fact, many, many times I have fed people rabbit and forgot, oh, here's the enchiladas. And they just assumed they were chicken enchiladas. And I'm like, well, I forgot to tell them because we eat it so much, it's just a part of our diet because they're such prolific. And really they're quiet. There's not a smell that's necessarily going to alert anybody. They're small, most homeowners associations, if you're not allowed to have chickens, they don't say anything about rabbits, So if you're deciding to pay attention to those rules, like that little mini government, yeah, so fabulous. To be able to produce the food for the rabbits is actually surprisingly easy also. So, yeah, I'm a real big proponent of animal products and rabbits by and large. The last big surge of rabbit production we had was in the 1970s, and the 70s in the United States was a very difficult decade. Like Nixon took us off the gold standard. There was really, really high inflation. Interest rates were going up. Nobody had a job. Stagflation was the word, right? And there were a lot of people who headed out to the hills, and a lot of backyard rabbit production was going on. Because backyard food production is what people turn to in times of crisis. And we are there now. This is time to do it.
And when the agencies of your own nation come by and say you can't grow food on your own property or raise meat source on your own property, that becomes a very big problem because the system that we currently rely on is going to continue to hyperinflate in price. Like I just saw today on Zero Hedge, cocoa producers are scrambling because the cocoa prices eclipsed all-time highest ever. This was about 3 months ago, and now they've gone straight up vertical into a hyperinflationary event.
Oh my God.
Yeah, an
I'm going to
OMG on that. I encourage everybody to take a look at it on how fast it's just vertical on the pricing. Now it really becomes who has the money to purchase that. But then what if it is just corn products or wheat products? Then what? Because, I want to give a shout out to Charlie Rankin over at
yes,
Yanasama Ranch, who's the one, he races bison in North Carolina. And he was the one who put out the original article that Mike Adams picked up and spread around through the net that is giving us that information about the CAFOs or the contained feedlot information out of Oregon. Now, I hadn't heard about the one in Maine, but
yeah,
digging through what I dig through in terms of legislation, also, I keep getting a lot of PDFs. People go, hey, thank you for all the hat tips for everybody out there. I really appreciate it. I do read. If you send me, there's a PDF, I will dig through it eventually when I have time. But one thing I came across was a new one. We'd heard that eventually in the future they were going to come for our home gardens and you'd have to get a permit or they'd limit what you could grow. But even inside there's a couple bylines, and I wanted to throw these to you and then get your reaction. When you grow the garden, you leave, most people, including myself, leave rootstock in there to churn that over for just extra biomass material for the next year. If you leave the rootstocks in, you will have to pay a CO2 and methane tax because the rootstocks are going to decompose and release those gases in the earth after you finish already and you cut whatever plant it is. It could be corn, could be bean, anything, radish, maybe you forgot it. There's a couple in there, they're rotting. But this is the level that it's going to be taken to and micromanaged, which means that somebody's going to have to come on your land and do all that measuring. So if they're envisioning it going out to that far end of the pendulum swinging over there, That's a huge problem that they're even envisioning it and writing it on paper as a plan. So,
Yes.
how do our communities around us stop such things from happening? Because you mentioned it, Marjory. We got to stop it now. This is a terminator that is coming for us all. It will not stop. I don't care if you
Yeah.
have to walk 5 miles to your cabin with no road, with no electricity in the forest. It is coming for you. It will not stop until it envelops and controls everybody and everything. It's no longer trying to hide from it and buy yourself time. I realize that here on this trip. We have to stop it. There's no other way around it. It has to stop.
So in 2015, Cargill, and they tell you what they're doing, right? The plans are there.
Yes.
It's in that PDF. It's usually buried or it's hidden in movies or, what, but they do tell you. And if you use your intuition, you can find it. Well, in 2015, Cargill, which is the world's largest privately held company, and they have their fingers in control over the entire global food supply, basically. Farms, seed companies, everything, distribution, everything. And I saw, normally when you have a big private company, they go, okay, you have to go public because you're too big, right? And I saw they said there was some write-up about Cargill, and they said, no, they are so big and complex, we could never take them public. I'm like, wow. Anyway, in 2015, they sponsored one of those scenarios, right? And it was called the food chain reaction crisis, something like that. You can still see there's still some remnants of it up on the internet. And I wasn't as aware or clued in to how important it was to look at these scenarios that they're doing, right? But I was always mystified because the sound bites that came out of it. So the scenario was this: 2020, something big happens on the planet, starts changing things. Then we start having all kinds of weird weather events and, different calamities, and the food supply starts costing more and more and more money. What happens in third world countries, and then food riots break out everywhere. What happens as you basically shut off the food supply to the planet. And so they were scenarioing that. And the soundbite they gave for the end of it was, in the end, cooperation won and a global carbon tax was implemented, or like it solved the problem. And I used to always wonder, how, what, why would how would a global carbon tax have anything to do with, like what? That just never, it never, I put that in the back of my mind as one of those WTF thoughts, like, how is that connected, right? Then I go on with life, and just exactly what you're saying is how I'm seeing that I'm connecting the dots here. They're wanting to use this carbon credit thing, this carbon crisis, which is, as you've so wonderfully and elegantly reported on over time, is just completely a made up thing, to totally control. It's like what they're doing with these farmers in Oregon. They just totally make up some kind of crazy legislation, which they have control of all of our governments. And so they can go ahead and get this legislation thing, and then you have to comply to that. And then if you don't, then they send out their enforcement arms, which is because they only control the police and the military and everything else, right? So we do have to stop it. And but that is the plan, and it's been a plan for a long time. And so that's the general gist, is that they're going to be using these carbon taxes and carbon credits or whatever as the enforcement legislation. You're absolutely right. I love the thing you mentioned on a podcast a while ago of, like, your place tucked away way up in the mountains is just going to buy you a minute of time. It's coming to everybody. Um, and well, one, we do have to be able to grow food. You just have to. You need to buy as much backup food as you can possibly afford or figure out how to store. And you need to know how to produce food, because we aren't ever going to be able to do any kind of resistance without a food supply.
Just under 1,500 years ago, something terrifying happened to the world's climate, something nobody could understand. The sun began to go dark. Rain, the color of blood, poured from the skies. Clouds of fine dust enveloped the earth. Winter gripped the land for 2 years. Then came drought, famine, plague, and death. Whole cities were wiped out. Civilizations crumbled, and nobody knew what had happened. It was a catastrophe. a catastrophe that affected millions and millions of people all around the world. But what was it? A catastrophic climatic event buried in the heart of the Dark Ages. This mid-6th century catastrophe was the most important date in the history of the past 2,000 years. This event created the world we live in today, something far removed from the minds of everyday peoples of our modern times. Unbeknownst to most, the catastrophe could at any time happen again. The volcanic winter was caused by at least 3 simultaneous eruptions of uncertain origin, with several possible locations proposed in various continents. There is even evidence of an extraterrestrial factor. A possible origin for this object could be the Taurid meteor stream. This stream is the result of the fragmentation of a much larger comet some 20,000 years ago. The Earth passes through the Taurid stream in November and June each year, resulting in regular meteor showers normally consisting of microscopic dust particles. A fragmentation of the stream is thought to have occurred around 500. It is possible that a fragment could then have collided with the Earth as it passed through the beta portion of the stream early in 536, causing the atmospheric dust veil event. The relevance is crop failures for several years in a row. While the dust veil was present, it may have caused widespread starvation, leading to an increased susceptibility to disease among the remaining population. Small comets had previously been thought to be less hazardous than small asteroids, but estimates show that a small comet fragment can have a global effect. In early AD 536, or possibly even late 535, an eruption or eruptions ejected massive amounts of sulfate aerosols into the atmosphere. The solar radiation reaching the Earth's surface reduced dramatically, and this rapidly cooled the atmosphere. Despite what the global warming nuts say, the sun seems to be the main driver of temperature and climate. The main historical aspect of the period around 536 may also be the most significant, especially to those descendants of the survivors, who would be us today. This period coincides with a mass population decrease in Europe, in the Americas, the Middle East, and in Asia. In Europe, this is commonly known as the Justinian period, named after the Justinian plague, and is believed to be the first appearance of the Black Death in Europe. Meanwhile, in the Mayan Empire, things were looking bad. Researchers have realized that there is a 100-year gap in the civilization's productivity starting in 540, suggesting a dark age. The civilization experienced mass crop failure, which led to disease, starvation, and likely internal strife. People evacuated cities in and around present-day El Salvador. Cities that were left behind experienced a dark age, as evidenced by a gap in written records and a sudden decrease in construction in Maya city centers during the 6th century. In China, 536 was no better. Frost and snow in July and August that killed the seedling crop, causing a major famine the following autumn. Weather was so severe that 70 to 80% of the people starved to death. Procopius. The sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, during this whole year, and it seemed exceedingly like the sun in eclipse. The sun was dark, and its darkness lasted for 18 months. Each day it shone for about 4 hours, and still this light was only a feeble shadow. Michael the Syrian. If such an event happened today, and crops failed over a significant part of the globe for several consecutive years, then once again a large percentage of the world's population would face starvation. Thankfully, unlike the peoples of the worst year to be alive, we don't have to worry about not having food to last. We have my Patriot supply. And right now, you can save $200 on a 3-month food kit with Adapt 2030. Adapt and stay prepared.
And now on with the video.
Yeah, it's just, I wake up in the mornings, I'm like, oh my God, every day there's a new thing coming in on the news. And it seems to me they're really, really, really clamping down on it now. They're really tightening the grip. So I have, you've seen the stuff where they're wargaming a food crisis scenario in Europe now because they know what they did to the farmers there. And they're wargaming it for this year. They know that this year there's a food crisis in Europe. There will be food riots. There will be people that can't afford to eat. There will be food supply disruptions. Uh, and and now they're doing the exact same formula here in the United States, in Oregon and Maine. There's apparently 10 other states that have that same legislation that they used in Maine. Texas, they just used, the energy weapons to destroy 1 million acres and God knows how many cows. It's happening. It's happening. It really is, and it's frightfully real. So I
I have
always,
some numbers for you then, because I
Yeah.
was looking at Ukraine grain production will be 5 to 10%, and that's on the high end of its normal yields, which is 30 million tons come out of Ukraine normally, and then that includes corn and wheat. And 20% or 20 million tons of that gets sent off to more impoverished nations in Africa. That was their main customer base right there. But if you're going to knock that down to, let's say, 5%, then you're already starting at a negative. And you're right, the farmers, how much are they going to plant? Because the way that this is just incredibly nefarious, but genius at the same time, and I give credit where credit is due, but you are going to meet your maker for what you have done, is they've taken and passed so much legislation. They knew that the farmers would come to this point where they would start coming to the capitals with their tractors. They knew the farmers would start dumping food on the roads. They gamed this out also. But at the very end of the run is the farmers stopped producing food, which is what these globalists had wanted and intended to do anyway, was to stop the global food supply. But if they on high were going to stop it and put fingers with their puppet masters, and they just said, all right, lock off all the supermarkets, everybody would overthrow them in about a fifth of an eighth of a second. But if you put so much legislation in place that it causes the farmers to then start the protests, and the farmers carry out the deed of not growing the food, stopping the food on the highways, destroying transit shipments of food across borders, they've carried out the exact same and got the exact same objective outcome. But this time they used the farmers to do it to ourselves to stop the food supply, versus them doing it where we could point a finger. Now it's the farmers. And see, this is how they're going to do it. They're going to use the citizens to carry out the objectives which they have in mind at the end goal. But then you'll say, well, it was because of the riots. It was because of the banking collapse. It was because of this. It was the people that did it. It wasn't those mighty on high in their ivory towers. So, digest on that for just a minute. They wanted the food to stop, and the food is stopping. The farmers are stopping the food now. So where does it go from here? And you brought up a valid point there, Marjory. Are the farmers in Europe going to plant, and at what percentage would they plant compared to their normal year? That's a very valid question to start crunching some numbers on.
Yeah, wow. I had no idea that the Ukraine numbers were so low. That's like 5%. I mean, they were a major
10 at maximum. That's a high range,
Yeah.
10.
Yeah. Well, how could they? I mean, they're starting to conscript women. Like they hardly have any. They apparently they'll even take 60-year-old men going into the military. I mean, they've lost so much manpower, and then all those fields, bombed out, destroyed, all the infrastructure. Remember, it was I think it was last winter, they destroyed a whole bunch of the electrical grid. How could anybody possibly be growing food under those conditions? So yeah, absolutely. But that was such a critical piece of Europe's thing. And then what the whole European thing, it's just melting down. And the thing is it's here too. It seems like it's been a little more guerrilla warfare here, right? So the Texas fires, or, the Ohio train wreck, or, God, how many times do you see a thing where 100,000 chickens were killed because of some fire or something? And, here and then there and then here and then there. And how many Jenga blocks do they take out before the whole thing falls down? And I agree with you. I think it's brilliant that they have structured it so that humans are fighting humans over a game that they have put in place, the global cult that are managing this planet, or have control of this planet. Yeah, what are we going to do? I really, and I think ultimately what's going to happen is as people start to figure this out, they're going to the global cult is sacrificing all the minions that they put in place in legislature, because that's where a lot of the anger is going to go to eventually. I think that we should expect to see an incredible amount of violence and anger directed at the political system. I don't know if we know how to get to the global cult themselves, but no matter what way we look at this from the big picture, it's going to be, this is it. This is the time when it gets really, yeah, and you're right. You mentioned the banking system, like, oh my God, that's like almost the smallest problem on my mind right now. And then that's ready to collapse at any moment, right? Did you see the thing of all the US dollars that have ever been created over time, 25% of them were just made in the last year? Like we're on that hyper, like I don't know why inflation isn't showing up so big time here in the United States, but man, when it hits, as soon as those BRICS nations start to really switch on, I think here it's going to be, it's going to be flash hyperinflation. In Weimar, Germany, it took 8 or 9 months for it to really take off, but I think it's going to happen here much quicker. So when it does hit, but we are in a world of hurt. And, I just want to encourage everybody who's watching this or listening to this, you're awake and aware and you're ahead of the curve. And if you aren't growing food right now, please start getting the skills to do that. It's actually really easy and a lot of fun. It's the most enjoyable thing I do every day, right? It's totally how I de-stress from all of this stuff, but also buy backup food and be prepared to help your community and help your neighbors. Do your best you can to, I'm doing that, to try and get people to prepare for this, because it's coming. And then there's the oh my God, the October 24th event, which we don't know what's going to go on with the tides globally around the world. This is this year is, oh my gosh,
It'll be
I
interesting,
feel,
but please understand there are solutions, and homegrown2030.com was one of those solutions. Marjory has a free webinar up there that'll really let you dip the toe deeply in the water on how you can take back some of your own food production under your own wing, no pun intended, with the chickens, and what you can do to get some backyard meat production and protein production underway as well. Like there's so many ideas in there that it's a well done webinar that touches through so many things on raised bed gardens, kind of tools you can need, where to find some of these tools, and then how to get simple meat production. And you went through the doughs and that sort of thing. And what you can garner just from that free webinar would be enough to start you on your journey to really start to look at the options out there and then take that and discuss it. It's not just you watching it yourself, it's you to watch it first, take some notes and some timestamps on it, and then share it with your family. Because as you know, and I know both, there's no way one person's going to be doing all this food production for a family and a farm. It takes multiple people because it is rigorous and strenuous. It's hot in the summer. You come in soaked, you need some time off. If your fans aren't working, power's out, and there's no AC, you're going to have to do old school, like go lay in the forest where the wind funnels down off of like a creek bed somewhere, so you can not overheat and have heat exhaustion. And then it's coming into the harvest time. There's a huge, like nature overproduces so much. If you think, well, if I have a couple plants, it's so prolific that you're going to have extra to share. And then you should start thinking about bartering too. So then take it to the next step is after you produce, how do you trade that for something? And, homegrown2030.com. I encourage you to go check that out. And, Marjorie, I know you can talk more about since you're the one who created the webinar, but I was just saying the solutions are there. They're truly there.
They really are. And I got to tell you, I don't know if we'll go into my story maybe on another podcast, but I will tell you when I had the wake up call to learn how to grow food, which was the most shocking event that's happened in my life. I totally am so grateful for that, because that honestly has been the best thing that I've ever done in my life, is growing my own. I always produce about half of my own food, no matter where I am. And yes, you can do things in condominiums and apartments. By the way, I also, I've been teaching people and researching and learning and figuring out what is the fastest and easiest ways to produce a lot of calories and, more importantly, nutrition, which is the elephant in the room. Americans are more malnourished than, God, your worst, African country. We have no nutrients in the food supply. how do you do that? And all these years, I try to get people to grow food, and they don't. So it's always, I've always known, well, people are not going to come to this until there's a real crisis. So how do you grow food when it really counts? You're under a time crunch, you have no experience, and you're probably older and out of shape. So that is who the webinar is designed for, because it's just become apparently obvious to me that that is going to be the situation for the majority of people that are going to be coming to this. And you're right. It really is. I teach a very simple system in that webinar for how to produce at least half of your own food. And I go over the calories and the servings and the nutrition and what it looks like day to day, and here's what the chicken coop looks like, and here's what and how do you manage this, and breeding and that kind of thing. So but it really, I mean, I've had kids operating this system, and I've had elders doing it. It's very, very simple. You can do this. You're going to have a learning curve. Yeah, for sure. But it really is. And I've drilled it down. There's tons and tons of ways to grow food, right? There's honey, there's mushrooms, there's goats, there's like a gazillion ways to grow food. But these three that I've selected in the webinar, which is our gardens, chickens, and rabbits, are the most calorically dense, nutritionally dense, and the easiest to operate and the quickest to get production up and going for, the average person, like I said, who knows nothing. Maybe they're older, they're out of shape. So, rabbits, definitely. And, if you get like, I don't know if I could kill the poor bunny, I totally understand that. That's why we have community, right? There are hunters or fishermen in your community, and you go, okay, here, I've got a litter of 10 bunnies. Why don't you take 2 and process them all and bring me back the other 8, or however you work it out, right? That's why we do that, which, by the way, processing small game like that is a skill that used to be like everybody knew, every children, adults, teen, everybody knew how to do that. It used to be like tying your shoes, which now that we have Velcro is also no longer a common skill. But everybody, it's not that hard to do, and easy to learn. By the way, this system is also set up that it can be fully operated without electricity. So most of the production happens fairly real time, so that you don't have to like store a bunch of it anywhere, the gardens you're eating from. I'm also a huge fan of the chickens. I recommend 6 laying hens, and a good laying hen will raise about 250 eggs a year. And a medium-sized egg is about 62 calories, which is a number I got from the USDA, which is, I love Joel Salatin. He calls them the US duh.
I went to Joel's farm up there. We live about 6 hours. We drove up there from where I live in Tennessee, went up to Virginia, and it was in a nice, rural area out there, and it's good information there too.
He's, bless his heart, and he's in that niche of helping small farmers become regenerative. And I've always been, I don't want to deal with the farming, because I never wanted to deal with the complexities of the legal system. I said, listen, I'll just always stick to backyard food production, because I just don't want to, The other real reason why we need, oh, by the way, those 62 calories per average egg, let me get back on that track. 6 laying hens, 250 eggs a year. They do take some time off to molt their feathers, or if it gets too hot or too cold, production can vary. But if you think about it, 6 hens, 250 eggs, that's 1,500 eggs in a year. And that is going to be 3 egg omelets for you for breakfast every day of the year. So you've got breakfast totally handled. And then you'll have 33 dozen eggs to trade or give away or use as ingredients in other things. So, and you can go buy some laying hens right now. You want to get a hen that's about 5 or 6 months old. That's when they start laying. And you can pick them up at a off of Craigslist even, or your feed store, or ask around. You build a chicken coop, and I'll show you what one looks like in the webinar. It's you can build the coop. If you aren't good at building coops, well, then hire somebody to build the coop, or talk somebody into building the coop. I mean, that can be built like in a matter of 2 weekends, right? It just doesn't take that long. Buy the hens. I recommend everybody start out buying chicken feed. It's available, and it's still fairly inexpensive right now, and you have so many other things to learn. Yes, there are ways that you can ultimately create the food for your chickens, but you've got so much to learn. Don't have that be one of the things. Plan that. That'll be stage 2, right? That's not stage 1. And like, bam, I mean, really, in 3 weeks, after the hens have settled in, you know, because you've moved them and they've got some adjustment. But really, in 3 weeks, you can be having breakfast every day of your life now figured out, right? That's huge. And I think it's almost like 95,000 calories a year, right? It's one meal, one really good, solid, nutritious meal a day, figured out in 3 weeks. So there are a lot of solutions that you can do very quickly and very simply. So yeah, homegrown2030.com. I've condensed 20 years of figuring out how to teach people, figuring out what are the easiest things and the fastest things, and then how to teach people that in the most effective way. And it's free because you know, it has to be. We're really at this point where we're at war, right? I've been talking to Mike Adams about this, and we have this, we are at war. And the first tactic in any war is to destroy the food supply. And I'm like, I was on a show the other day, I think it was on Sarah Westall's show. I was begging people to grow food because if you can't eat, then you will totally be at the mercy of them for when they want to feed you. You'll do whatever you have to do to get food. But if you have your own food supply, you have a fighting chance of, humanity has a fighting chance of, I believe in the chaos of what's coming. We actually do have a chance to actually get out of the grip of the global cult. And really, you and I were talking earlier, and I believe it's about 12,000 years that humanity has been under this control. So when you hear people talking about, oh, human nature, you know, we're always fighting each other or wars, or no, that's not human nature. I believe, though, that we have an opportunity to become free of this control that we have. But the only way we can do that is if you can eat. I tried being a breatharian once, and it didn't work real well. It's, you know, I like food. I'm totally into food. Oops. And I got a cat who wants to visit. She is totally a camera ham. Stop it. And
We
she,
got onto a different path to keep the true knowledge. Yeah, because you can't live without the fats. And, you know, and I want to say, we live near an Amish farm, and we buy our hogs from them, and then they have them processed in a different Amish farm. It's about 30 minutes away. But when we went over there to the butcher, because they do deer also, and we noticed they had a bunch of extra, you know, fat laying around and whatnot. So we got bones for our dogs from some of the cattle. And they had some fat laying around, and we got a little scraps of that. They gave us probably about 15 pounds, and we rendered some fat down ourselves. Coming to find out, all the Amish get all the fat from all the pigs, and then they render down themselves and then can it. So one guy over in our Amish farm has said, hey, you're going to go get your hogs and pick up all the smoked meat and everything. Can I arrange for you? Can you bring all the fat back? He's got about a 300-pound of fat and stuff wrapped up in bags. Can you bring it back here? And I was like, yeah, of course. So I brought it back, and then we started talking about fat. I tell you what, about 2 days later, he came over and he had like jars of this stuff canned. His wife had canned it, pressure canned it, and just gave it to us like, hey, thanks for going over and bring the fat back to it. So I was blown away, like, what? Dude, I would do that for nothing just because you're our neighbor, and it's just like helping each other. And I know y'all don't want to run a horse in the middle of the night to go do this stuff. Geez, that's the least I could do, is like drop something a mile from my house on my way back. Like, and I was just so shocked, the generosity of that. But get in there with your local communities and understand where there's other fat sources, because you are absolutely going to lose your mind if you don't have fat to consume, because your brain will consume itself. And when I say lose your mind, I really mean it in a true sense. Like, for the last thing to talk here for a second, if you don't have any fats in your brain, what happens to your body then?
Yeah, fat is so important, and it comes from, and that's why animal products are so important, because you've never gone into a garden and gotten a fatty vegetable, right? There's no fat in there. The fat is actually the most difficult macronutrient to produce. After that is protein, after that is carbohydrates, and then fibers are everywhere. So of the macronutrients, fat is the most important. I went to Cuba in 2012 to interview survivors of their special period, which was, you know, the Cuban economy plummeted 60% overnight. The lights went out, the water went out, the average Cuban lost about 20 pounds. And one of the conversations really struck me was like they had no fats. And this one woman was telling me people's faces turned gray and their skin was like flaking off because they had no fats. Yeah, and people were there was all kinds of mental problems. So there's a lot of really great fats in eggs. And then people say, well, what about rabbits? And I overfeed my rabbits because I want the fat, right? So you can produce fat, it's you can do it, and it's vitally important that you do it.
Remember Homegrown 2030 to access that webinar, and please leave some comments below so we can grind on those comments a bit and try to get you some answers the next time we talk. Because, Marjory and I have been trying to do this on a monthly, but I was busy traveling this last month, looking for information on some events coming up here, title events and thing. But if you do have questions, please ask them, and I will be happy. And, Marjory will take a look also at the video and see if there's anything there that we can answer for you to keep the conversation going, but also answer some questions to get you pointed in the right direction. So thanks for watching.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on, and start growing food.
Start growing food. It is the time. Yeah. Bye for now.
This is Mysteries in the Histories. A mysterious manuscript, roughly 250-page book written in an entirely unknown language and writing system. It's been carbon dated back to the 1400s and includes illustrations of plants that don't resemble any known species, believed to have been intended as a medical text. It's named for the Polish book dealer who purchased it in 1912. This is the mystery of the Voynich manuscript. Since its discovery in 1912, the 15th century Voynich manuscript has been a strange, mysterious cult phenomenon captivating the minds of many. Its first confirmed owner was Georg Barisch, from 1585 to 1662, an alchemist from Prague, who discovered it in his library. Barisch tried to investigate the manuscript's origins to no avail. The manuscript, full of handwriting in an unknown language, zodiac symbols, naked women, and strange objects like unknown plants, seem to be from another time, or even another world. For centuries, this book repeatedly changed hands. When it was purchased by Voynich, who posited that it was authored by Albertus Magnus, an alchemist, or Roger Bacon, an early scientist. People believed that Voynich himself fabricated the manuscript, although that theory wouldn't explain the carbon dating of the paper and ink to the 15th century. The book itself bears no indication of its authors, about 6 inches by 9 inches and around 232 pages decorated, not unlike others in the illuminated age. Wrapped in vellum, with vellum pages, the manuscript features 116 folded folios bound in 18 bundles. The binding of the book is old and busted, though it is not original to the text. Many of the pages are fold-outs, some are missing. Inside the tome are innumerable lines of looping text, inked in iron gall in a medium typical of the Middle Ages. Scribbled in a strange, unfamiliar language and a strange, unfamiliar script, incomprehensible, causing Voynich to conclude that the tome was written in code. Alongside the text, unknown if important or decorative, there is an abundance of illustrations and pictorial art. Composed of inks and pigments in tones and color palettes common to the 1400s, these illustrations seem to split the manuscript into 4 separate sections, including sections about botany, astronomy and astrology, balneology, the science of the therapeutic use of baths, and pharmacology, as well as a 5th and final section, with blocks of text separated by stars. The first and largest section of the manuscript is the botany section that contains detailed drawings of plants as if from another world or a lost continent, plants no one can identify and no one has ever seen before. The astronomy and astrology section has illustrations of the stars, the sun and the moon alongside several zodiac signs. Immersed in strange, shared baths, female figures frolic through the pages of the text's balneological section, while the pharmaceutical section is filled with what appears to be medicinal plants, indicated by the inclusion of medicinal bottles throughout this fantastical illustration. Like Voynich, many modern scholars suspect that the manuscript's text is a ciphered form of a familiar language. with their theories of the tome's latent linguistics flitting from Latin to Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs and Toltecs of Mexico. Others say that the text is an artificial language or strange shorthand, and others still see the text as meaningless scribbles. The theories of the tome are, thus, all over the place, with no one opinion snagging widespread support. The Voynich manuscript continues to mystify medievalists and confuse cryptologists centuries after its supposed creation. It remains as impenetrable and inexplicable as ever. But is this truly one of the mysteries in the histories? To find out, sign up for our show notes. Sign up to our show notes email list and get access to longer episodes of Mysteries in the Histories just for signing up. Signing up for the show notes, you get behind-the-scenes thoughts and points we sometimes can't relay over social media platforms. Brought to you by ITM Trading. ITM Trading has spent the last 28+ years developing a team of expert researchers and gold and silver analysts to make this possible. Simply put, we build strategies which are historically proven to protect your wealth and assets through any economic downturn. 866-834-1422. That's 866-834-1422.